And this is the visitor centre, and we have to book online here.
You have to get the star of the show too.
And you're dressed like a...
This will be on the New World, the American
I know,
side.
I know. What kind of date?
I would say 18 to 1850.
Right.
Okay, so alright everybody, have a lovely time.
So the outdoor museum talks about Ireland, Ulster, before the journey, and then we've got a section with a lot of exhibits about what kind of housing, etc. you find in, or you found in the New World. Wild West wagon, like out a wagon train. So this is a map that you get, and there's 40 exhibits, or 41 house exhibits there. You can, and the detail, the before and the journey and the New World. And if you turn over, and let's have a look at this. And then it gives you information about each of the houses. And this is us in the visitor centre. Price list. This is what it was all about, folks. The prospect of a better life on the distant horizon, because life in Ireland, north and south, was horrific. We've got the famine and all the rest of it had happened. It's an American buggy. Belonged to Father Arthur McGuinness, originally from County Omagh, born in 1835. Philip Jackson, sculptor of emigrants' faces, and this is the type of houses and places of worship that these people left. Between 1700 and 1900, over 2 million people left the province of Ulster for North America. Unbelievable. And these ships were tiny and they were fragile, and people made their way across the Atlantic in them, and it was unbelievable. And many were lost, and many were lost going over the Rockies and all the rest of it. There was disease, there was sickness, there was Indian attacks. And this is the conditions that smallholders were working in. This is them retting the flax in a flax dam. And this is their wee cottage. And there's the great landowner's house that was taking all their money. So there was disease, there was crowded land, there was famine, there was all sorts of things here. There was disadvantage. So the people grabbed at the opportunity to get away. And the stream becomes a flood in the 1700s. Between 1770 and 1774, more than 30,000 emigrants left Ulster for America. And there was various uprisings as well, where people were trying to get better for themselves, and they heard news of America, so they decided to go. And these are the type of conditions that people lived in. This is called a cottage. And then the famine hit, and it was just hell. And people had no choice but to get away. Famine hit in 1845, the potato famine. Born to emigrate. And this is one of the boats that would have sailed. This is the splendid bark, Lady Caroline, 1847. Like this is a small boat. That's sailing. That bark was sailing from Warren Point. And emigrant packs for the journey to port. There was no safety net here. You're cutting your ties from your loved ones, from everything that you'd known. And these are the conditions between decks. It was pretty rough. There was no flush toilets in those days. Little to our floating prison. The almost constant darkness added to the emigrants' depression. These are better conditions. Second-class cabin. Steam conquers the Atlantic, so things got a wee bit better. There they are arriving, and that's in the 1886. Into the west. And many of the men from Ulster fought for American independence. There's the American Constitution. This is what they faced as regards wild animals. You've got beavers and you've got brown bears. And this is the type of countryside you were in. And the rocky road, having broken the physical barriers of the Appalachians, the Ulster settlers remained in the forefront of the great western movement or migration towards the 19th century. Simply it was the usual starting point, and this is to get over the Rockies. And the railroad comes, which revolutionised everything. And this is telling us about the American Civil War. Davy Crockett, hero of the Alamo, was the son of an Ulster settler who had fought at the Battle of Kings Mountain during the Revolution. Sam Houston, commander of the Texan forces and the state's first president, was also of Ulster extraction, and some of his family lived at Houston Drive, Belfast, and I have done a video on that, and there's the carnage of death. And Thomas, given the military tradition associated with Ulster immigrants, it is perhaps not surprising to find that two of the war's leading generals were of Ulster descent. Thomas Stonewall Jackson on the Confederate side and Ulysses Simpson Grant on the Union side. Other prominent Ulster men included General James Shields and General Andrew McReynolds. And these are the conditions that some of them were living in. My goodness. With immigrants with little capital and few connections, life in New York could prove for every bit as grim as the small farms they left in Ulster. And they're packed in like sardines here. The men who built America. An awful lot of immigrants from a lot of immigrants built the railroads and built the skyscrapers that you see now in New York and other cities. So we're heading out to the old world and then we'll go into the new world. So this is the old world. My father worked on the flax like this. There's a beetling mill. And this is an example of an old cottage that folks would have left. And there's not much to it. Don't know whether you can see that. And there's your sofa. And what's number 3?
Weaver's Cottage.
This is a weaver's cottage. Now, you see everything that you're looking at, it's really spruced up. Back in the day, it would have been an awful lot rougher than this. Everything's, looking pretty well here. All tarted up. Paint round the windows and such like. And
I think the Queen's coming.
And the roofs looking really good. There's a millstone there, but it does give you some idea of the living conditions. Then this would have been a very substantial and very good house. And this is the weaver's cottage, and everybody in the family had to get involved with this. There's the spinning wheel. And there's the sofa. Here's your loom. And it's computerized, as you can see. And I'm just hitting my head off there. There must have been, there were small people. Oh dear. And this is a very good house. And I've just bumped my head off the door here. And this is a replica of Mountjoy Presbyterian meeting house, where Thomas Melon would have met for worship.
Well, that concludes all our business this morning. God bless you and have a safe journey home. Thank you very much.
And there's no oil-fired central heating in here. I don't even see any fire. you know. It would have been Baltic in here in the winter time. This footstone from the grave of an early settler in America, Daniel Macaulay, who died at Open John, Virginia, 1829, aged 86, was presented by Virginia Independence Bicentennial Commission, May 1975. And this is very typical of Reformed Presbyterian type church building. No mod cons, no pictures, or no mosaics, or no gold, no ornate anything.
The vestry.
Oh, is this the vestry? I wonder, it doesn't look as if you can get in. And this is the Melon house. And Thomas Melon was born
1813.
And this is the original house. All the other houses here have actually been taken brick by brick, not brick, but stone by stone, and rebuilt. But this one is 100% original. Born in this cottage, 1813, built by his father and uncle. Well, it's quite substantial. It would have been a big thing for him to leave this.
He was only 5.
Aye, but for his parents to leave it. Because it's, and there's the old pump. My uncle and aunt had and other uncle had a pump like this sitting in their apple orchard. Oh yeah. And there's a donkey and looks like a Clydesdale. Don't know. Beautiful animal. Hello. Hello. Yes. You're a good looking boy. But I'll not go near you and annoy you, because you might bite me. Yes. Toodaloo. And this is the Melon home, and it's quite a substantial home. And the people here had quite a good living, but they had to pay, they could never own their own house. So that was the big game changer in going to America, because you just had to pay a rent to the landlord who owned the house. You'd never own it. And the opportunity to get to America, you could buy your own land and house, and it could be passed down to your relatives. So any work you did to it, you know, was for your future generations. But this is the kind of lifestyle that the Melons had here before emigrating to America.
I always say when I'm here, I'm coming behind. We use closed
Now this is the Melon homestead.
Everybody was clear.
And we're up at the Viewpoint now. And you can see Enniskillen that points that way, and Loch Earn and Castlederg, President Wilson's house at Dergalt, and Gorchin, and all sorts of dates and all the rest of it on that sundial. And this is part of the Melon family of estate of, well, you wouldn't call it an estate, land of, I think they had something like 30 acres.
23.
Or 23 acres, a voice from the gallery. And the reason that we're homing in on the Melons is that one of the Melons came home later on. I think the grandson came home to find the old house run down, and it was being used as a bar, and he galvanised interest and galvanised funding to refurbish it, and other individuals supported him, and other houses were donated and built. So it was all built in and around the Melon homestead. This is a substantial house now. These people were the Campbells from Plumbridge, County Tyrone, and the house was built in 1786 by Hugh Campbell. Two of his sons, Hugh and Robert, emigrated to America around 1818. Robert would become a famous fur trapper, a successful businessman and close friend of US President Ulysses Grant. And that's something else. This house was very, you know, this is a brilliant house. There's a crest. What does the other side say? There we go. Brilliant.
This reminds me of the house that we went to see that your daddy went to.
Yeah.
Have paneling like this.
That's right. And Tanya said this house reminded her of my father's house at Ballybay, Creva. And it's still standing. And the staircase at the entrance here is exactly the same. Only it was closed off by wooden panel. And you be careful not to bump your head, like I did. And there's the dinner, and the wheaten bread and all laid out. And here's the kitchen. So the Campbell house, the squeaky floorboards. We're standing at the front of the house here, and they sort of had kitchen gardens. But here's an interesting flower here. It's a black iris. I haven't seen too many of these about. In fact, I haven't seen any. And Tanya said that this is this Irish rose. It smells great. Of course, I can't smell. I lost my sense of smell years ago. And there wasn't much heat about in these houses, no matter whether you're rich or poor. And this is a turf bank, and the turf is cut out here systematically and dried and used for heating. This is the house of John Joseph Hughes' boyhood home, carefully moved from Dernevad townland in County Monaghan. Look at the jab wall as you enter. This would have protected the hearth from drafts and offered his family some privacy. John left this house for America in 1817, where he eventually became Catholic Archbishop of New York and the builder of Fifth Avenue St. Patrick's Cathedral. Wasn't that some undertaking? These people that emigrated, they weren't stupid. Ah, there's the wee wall to stop the drafts. I'll go in here and have a look. And there's the spinning jenny, and there's the dining room table. It's 2 o'clock. There's the sideboard, and there's the bed, and there's the hearth. And this is a decent house too, like. And this is Castletown one-roomed national school, and it says the date up here is 1845, but actually there was a schoolhouse on the site from the 1790s. And there's your toilet. Dry toilet, of course. So there we are, the old schoolhouse.
How old are you, young lady? 6 years of age.
And my father would have taught when he started off in 1934 in a schoolhouse like that. Ballydown Primary, which is now in the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum. They took it apart and rebuilt it. And they're see the circles there.
Yes.
You'd got a stick and hit those,
Yeah.
wouldn't you?
And run them along.
Run them along the ground. So where are we off to now?
We're off on the journey.
On the journey.
So it's actually number 14 to 22, the journey.
Right. This is the type of street, Ulster Street, that you're going to leave. Didn't have an ice cream, Melons or anything like that. There's the post office. And there's Shipboy Street.
So this would be on near the ocean. If
There's
it's called
a Georgian type house, I presume. There's a Saddler's. Merchants and provisions, and numerous others down the bottom of the street. We're just going to go and have an ice cream. This is a typical Ulster house dating from the mid-1800s probably, or earlier, and there's nothing fancy about it. And you're in the post office there. And the post office living room. And I haven't got time to go into each of those shops, and I'd run out of memory as well. So that's the printers with all sorts of type set up. Saddle makers in there. Household provisions, dispensing chemist. I'll let you see in it, it's pretty good. Well, wines and spirits next door. And the rope making across the road. Rope and twine maker. Now you might be interested in this. How rope was made using the implements before me. So I'll tear away on, and we're heading down to a dress shop, and then we're heading to Ship and Dockside Gallery, and this is the ship that it'll take you to the New World, I presume. Or this is dockside. There's the ship waiting for us. And this is dockside. And this is where you got your tickets and all the rest of it. So we're just going onto the ship here to take us to the New World. And it's pretty basic. You're into cots. There's not an awful lot of room. You're just piled in. And here we are. We're coming out in the New World. And there's the American flag. And this must have been a daunting experience for these emigrants. This is the quayside. There's a gentleman waiting there to give you a lift. That's your taxi, if you have money to pay for it. Cheap lodgings. So here we are in America, and this is an American street, I presume. The way it was. It would have been Thomas Melon's bank, dating from the 1870s. Nice, I remember seeing pictures like this in an old western. You know, this is where they were withdrawing their money.
Prefer to get the real thing.
This is the general store.
The next house, the Fulton house, it's an original house. It was brought from America and knocked down and rebuilt here. Will it be okay?
This is the wheelwright and Cooper's at the end of the street. And this is Samuel Fulton's stone house from the New World. The original building was moved from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Samuel emigrated from Donegal in 1724, bringing Irish building methods with him. The house is 1.5 stories and is constructed from field stones that he found on the land. I mean, this is some undertaking back in those days. And there's Duck. This is his storage area. And there's a wee bit of a stream running through it as well to get water. And there's an upstairs. You can see the enclosure, the fencing from that time, and what they're growing here is what do you call it? Corn on the cob and pumpkins. And this is the American log cabin. So what tell us about the log cabin.
Two-room log cabin is typical of those built by early immigrants such as Thomas Melon. Many new arrivals lived in these types of dwellings for years, living frugally and saving carefully until they could build a more spacious and permanent home.
So these log cabins were sort of like a stopgap. The first settlers would have built these, and then they would have replaced them probably by stone buildings. But these served their purpose. You got a roof over your head, and got heat. All wood, except the chimney breast. Did a bit of trapping there. There's how he cleans the table of crumbs. And this would have been mud. And you better mind your head again. That wouldn't have been here. It'd be nippy in the winter time unless that was mud in between the cracks. So there you go. Life in the log cabin. And there's your quilt. That the ladies of the house would have spent hours and hours in dim light working at.
Pumpkins are...
Yes, doing very well too, isn't it?
So this is apple pancake. Well, it's supposed to be corn pancake, but
an apple in it.
Which is a bigger piece? I'll take the bigger piece.
Yes, that's it there.
Oh, that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Lovely.
And then you take it over there, that's how they bake them.
On the outdoor griddle.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Super.
Delicious, thank you.
So, Mary Barry, eat your heart out.
I don't think so.
Can be housed here that can feed crops.
Pennsylvania log barn. And animals could be put in here for the winter, and you could have had gatherings, communal gatherings, dances and what have you in here too. Not sure what's going on in here. What he's doing. Is that I don't know, is he sowing wood? I don't know.
How can you construct a building like this without machinery? Like, look at the size of those.
You used an axe. That's what you did.
But to lift them, I mean. To lift them.
Oh, it was all lifted by
Police and things.
well, they did, but probably they used manpower more than anything else. buttercups in that field.
Will you hear this? Don't be recording everything, love. Turn it off a minute.
The buttercups in that field.
Will you hear this? Don't be recording everything, love. Turn it off a minute.
And this is the Melon, Pennsylvania log farmhouse. Melon's built this in Pennsylvania, and it's larger and better equipped than their first log cabin. The original farmhouse still stands in the town of Export, Pennsylvania. Wow.
When you spoke, I think if you wouldn't you had it with Cottage. Well, if I thought you wanted to come, I didn't think it was known as a public.
There's fish drying, I presume. There's a fur. Is that? And this is weaving.
That's candles, that's not fish.
Oh, is that
Candles, wax
oh,
candles.
that's candle. I thought it was fish. Oh dear, stupid.
There's your herbs drying.
That is right. Yes, herbs. I knew that. And these people's homes were their workplaces in many cases as well. And this is the upstairs. Substantial building. So what's this one?
38. The Cunningham Spring House. Life in America demanded innovation, hard work and self-sufficiency. Qualities represented in this humble spring house. It was built over a natural spring.
Right.
Its cool waters helping to keep meat, vegetables and dairy fresh.
Right.
Logs are notched to fit snugly with each other, and a mixture of clay, straw, stones and animal hair forced into the gaps.
Right. So the Cunningham Spring House, and this would have been there. There's the spring running through it. Used as storage to keep things cool. There's a plaque here dedicated to the memory of Eric Montgomery, OBE, founder of the Ulster American Folk Park, on its 40th anniversary, 2016. Copse of American trees planted in memorial. These are American trees, all the way from America. This is Uriah Hupp's log house. Common feature of the 19th century homes is the front porch here. And he's got a wee garden going on round the side. And this would remind me of like something out of Tom Sawyer or something like that. And there's the spuds coming. And you can keep the chickens in underneath there too. And you can imagine some of them coming out and sitting here of an evening playing the banjo. And this was a good house. And this was a pleasant way of life. The hardships, the earlier hardships about settling for the early settlers had passed, and folks were established and had some form of, you know, I wouldn't call it luxury, but it wasn't as bad as before. This is William No, and this is Richard Mcallister's house at Tyler Creek in West Virginia. He was a yeoman farmer, and this, you're talking about in the 1860s. It showed that Richard was literate and held property and personal belongings of about $1,200, which was around $40,000 today. Pretty good. I'm going to have to go in by the back door. You can see wood used for everything.
See the swish curtain rails on the curtains?
We had curtain rails like that whenever I was growing up.
A piece of string?
Ah, bit of cord.
No, you didn't. You had a piece of sort of wire covered in plastic.
Aye, that's right. No, not string. Wire covered with plastic. That's right. You are right.
And it had a little hook on it. And hooked on
that
each.
is right. And it did
you
just...
had those. And then you had a pelmet. A wooden pelmet.
It did as well.
You had a wooden pelmet and that covered the top bit.
That's right. Did as well. And I didn't expect to see this. This is Francis Rogan's prosperous house, a red brick home he built on their farm. That wealth was due to, I have to say this, slave labour. And the slaves would have performed duties in the house as well. And this was from 1860. Just totally gobsmacked to see an 1860 brick house like this. And an assessment was done of his wealth, and it came, including the slaves that he owned, and it came to nearly $50,000, and that is $1.4 million in today's money. Hi there. So this man would have been rich and
yes.
Well-to-do.
Yes.
What do we know what he worked at?
Oh yes, he owned a cotton plantation.
Right.
Down in Tennessee.
Right.
But this is the original house, and it was built by Francis Rogan. But the story of the house goes much further back. Whenever Hugh Rogan and his brother-in-law Daniel Harlan, they were both linen weavers in Ireland, and with the decline of the linen industry following the Napoleonic Wars, they decided to leave their young wives and their families back in Ireland and come across here to the New World to see what adventures they could have here. But when they arrived, the American War of Independence has just started.
So that was a bad time.
So they're stuck. There's no ships going back for the next 9 years.
Right.
And they both become soldiers. And then Hugh acts as a guide, taking the soldiers along from one fort to the other along the Cumberland River Valley. And in return, he's given a small plantation down here in Tennessee. He works it for a few years, and then one night he's deciding to find out what has happened to Nancy and young Bernard. But he stops off with Daniel, his brother-in-law, but he's been a naughty boy, because he has now a new life, a new wife, and a new family.
Oh no.
So he doesn't want Hugh coming home to Ireland to
tell the bad news.
Yes.
Oh dear.
So poor old Hugh comes back here, where he extends the plantation to just over 300 acres, and at that time he has about 71 slaves working on the plantation. He lived in a little stone house that would have been adjacent to this one, and one night he decides, I'm definitely going back to see Nancy. But after 22 years, no letters, no communication, he turns up on her doorstep, and she's still waiting for him. So it must have been true love, because Nancy and Bernard come back, and then the following year Francis is born. We don't know why it's Francis who takes over the running of the plantation. When Hugh dies, we can only assume that Bernard at that stage considers himself too old. And then Francis builds this fantastic house to show how wealthy they have become. It's originally built for Nancy and Bernard, his mother and brother, but then later on he marries Martha Reid and they go on to have 7 children in this house. But this is the height of their wealth, because whenever Abraham Lincoln comes into power as president, he abolishes slavery. So of course, times change after that.
And rightly so. Listen, many thanks.
Okay.
What's your first name?
Vivian.
Vivian. That was a great exposition, a historical exposition. That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
But you don't ask me dates, because dates don't stick.
Oh, don't you worry. Oh, that was great, Vivian telling us all that. I love a story. Things were different back then, folks. Very different. And if you were a slave, they were absolutely horrible. Absolutely horrible, if you had a bad master especially. Massive house.